Okay, well, so welcome here to the React best practices, common patterns, and useful tips training. Today we are going to see all this, how we can improve our way of creating like React applications and developing applications. Basically, this will be an overview, but we are going to cover a lot of topics here. Of course, feel free to follow the training as you like. If you would like to code with me, or if you would like just to take notes on that. So after that, we can like continue with the application and know all the tips. So, okay, let's start. Okay, a little bit of background. What is developer experience? Well, according to Red Hat, developer experience describes the interactions and feelings that a developer has when working with a body of code in order to meet a specific objective. I mean, in other words, it's like a user experience, but for us developers. I mean, user experience is how comfortable someone is of using a product or an application. So basically, developer experience is the same. The way that we need to feel like comfortable writing code, and it should be like clear and easy to use for us. So that's basically the developer experience. And why do I mention this? Because, well, as you know, this is a React training, kind of advanced with some patterns and that to make our life easier, because React is a very free framework, which is one of the three main frameworks, as all you know, or in this case, library for front-end development, which is like React, Angular, and Vue. But yeah, React has is his biggest like strength, but at the same time is the biggest con, perhaps, that is very free. So you can like develop things in any way that you will do it. So, for example, this can be bad for developers, because if you're not like very related with React, you can get like lost very easy. Because of this freedom, you can start like coding, and your code can really come to a mess very quickly if you don't have like follow best patterns and best practices. So that's basically what's this training for, to help us that freedom to cover and to develop more structured like React applications. So of course, we need to solve problems, but not at the expense of the developer. We need to solve problems, but in a way that us developers have a good developer experience. And what can we do about this that I am telling you? Of course, there are a lot of ways of making and developing React applications. This is one of them, which I found it very useful. There are many other ways. This is very popular among the React community, and it's basically the model view presenter. I don't know if you have heard of it, but it's like an architectural pattern used to describe how to build user interfaces in the client side. And as you see here, is basically divided into, do you see my mouse, by the way?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
It's divided into three steps here: the view, the presenter, and the model. So basically, very short, the view contains the presentation components, which are intended only to receiving like updated data presented and send user events. It should be kind of dummy, to say in a way, just to present information and send events. There shouldn't be like any logic here. Of course, they can be like basic logic, like for example, the state of a toggle, or for example, the state of a select list or something like that. But there shouldn't be like complex logic here. They are just for presenting data and for sending events. Oh, sorry. And you have also here the next step, that is the presenter, which are of course components that contains views. You can see this as pages, for example. The components that have more data, more like they are responsible of making more things. For example, an example here, we have a component that it's a form, and when you click a button, it sends the user event, and the presenter is responsible for submitting that form. So there are any kind of components. And at the last, and perhaps the most important part, is the model, which here you can you need to put here all the logic related to the data fetching. I mean, API calls or whatever you are using, and the internal store. We are going to see some kind of stores that exist in React, but yeah, we are going to manage all our data related to the store and also to the data fetching here. So basically, it works this way. for example, in the case that if I am submitting a form in the view, I just like submit the form, it sends the event, the presenter handles it and send it to the model, updates the store or whatever it needs to do, and the other way. Then it returns the new data, the presenter passes it to the view, and the view just renders the data. So in this way, we can like separate of concerns in the application, and all the applications keeps like clearer and easier to understand. We are going to see this in practice, but it's just a general overview for you to know what we are going to do. And okay, the last thing we need to know before starting the practical thing is that it's important to differentiate the different states that we have in React. We have, of course, the local state, which is the state that I told you that belongs to a single component. The UI logic. So you see here is the local state. And this state belongs, of course, to, for example, like toggles or for like drop downs, the selection, the option, not something very complicated. We have also the shared global state, which is very important here in React. We have several alternatives of implementing it. One of the most popular is Redux. We also have context API. We have like Flux, but there are a lot of alternatives. We will use Redux in this example. So it's a state that it resides in the model layer, and it's a state that is shared across all the application. So we are going to see how does it work. Of course, we can have like remote API state, and there in that any API has, like in databases and that. The meta state, that is a state of the states, that a state that like is loading or it has error or something like that. And finally, the router state, which saves the current route. So that are basically all the steps that we have in the states that we have in React. So finally, okay, let's get our hands-on actions. Enough of talking, and let's get to the coding. Everybody has already cloned the repository? Yep.
Yes.
Okay, so for starting here, a little bit of context. We are going to design, well, not to design from scratch because we only have an hour, but we are going to use the best practices in this, our cocktails app. We are going to use this as a public API, the cocktail DB. It has a list of cocktails and ingredients and all of that. So we are basically work with this. And, and this is our application. We have here, for example, we can search classify by alcoholic and not non-alcoholic. Like this, we can see the ingredients, the names, and of course, it's a very basic application. We have here our lists of cocktails. We can create our customized list. For example, I have one here created, and we see that this contains like 3 cocktails. For example, the Arctic fish, sweet bananas, and for example, the just a moment. And we can see also like details of each of our list here. For example, the Arctic fish, we can see the ingredients and how to prepare this. And of course, we can create more lists here. For example, this, my healthy cocktail list. And by creating our list, we will be able to add, for example, I have to add cocktails to our custom list. We see now we have here created one. So I will add it here, and we can return to our cocktails and see that my healthy cocktail has now the Aloha fruit punch. So basically, this is what we are going to be working with. So let's get started. Everyone is should be in the dev training branch of the project. So let me know if you are there.
Yes.
Yep.
I am there.
Okay. What?
Yeah, the sound is super low.
Yeah, it's very low.
Maybe you can turn up the volume of the mic.
No, I was asking if only with the repo is enough, or
yeah, for now it's just with the repo is enough. You should like only install the dependencies and that. And as we see, for starting the project, which will Yarn start, we have warnings because that's the intended. We are going to refactor this code into to reach the best practices. So let's get started. I will explain with you the basics of this project, starting with the project structure. We have, of course, in the React best practices sheet that we have here, we have also this described. But here we have, for example, the basic structure of our code. So we are like structuring this way. We have, starting with our API client folder. We have here all the logic related for connecting with the API directly. For example, we have here like the requests. This is basically the lowest thing, accessing directly to, using Axios to the public API that we saw before. And as you see here, of course, here we have like just methods for accessing the different endpoints. Here we have and some utilities to compose the data. We are not going to dive deeper in this because this is kind of related to the API, which, by the way, is kind of, it has some strange endpoints and that, but yeah, it works good, so we will use it. And by the way, it's important. It's not a React good practice, but it's a common good practice to always have like constants here in our project. I divided here constants for the API part of the project. So here we have our paths of the API, which I told you they are kind of awkward, like the endpoints here, and also some query keys, just like an overview for you to know that with these methods, we are fetching data from our API using Axios. And after that, here we have a components folder, which is intended to have all the components that are reusable across the app. You know, for example, we have lists that can be used in more than one place. And I have another component with models. We can group all components as we want, but they should be like similar characteristics. So here we have like all the components that we are going to use in our applications. Now we have another folder which is hooks, which is basically divided in subfolders. Hooks are, well, as you know, hooks are very important in React. They allow us to encapsulate logic or to share like functionalities across a lot of components. So basically, here I have hooks, some specific from the API, some specific like for the store. As I told you, do you remember that in the MVP pattern, we saw that we should like keep our logic from fetching data and fetching the store separate. So here we have like just a specific hooks for accessing our endpoints and encapsulating our logic here, which we are going to dive deeper after this. And of course, we have custom hooks for some functionalities. We have common hooks, for example, and this. And after this, we have like our models folder. Since we are going to use like React with TypeScript, we define here our models. We define here models for our forms, models from our APIs. How do they receive parameters? How do they like return data? And also we have like common models for cities in our project, like cocktails list, what looks like a cocktail list, how to look at a cocktail. As you see here, the API returns the strange fields because it could be like easily an array, but I don't know why the API returns like 15 properties of an object just for the ingredients. Yeah. But yeah, that's how the API has been built, so it's okay. And yeah, of course, we have our entities for all of that. And then our store, we are going to use Redux. It's already configured on that. We don't need to worry about that. Of course, for Redux here, we have our reducers. Basically, what this does is like to allow us to update our general app state. We have defined, as we see here, our general application state, which is basically just a cocktail list that is an array of cocktail lists. It's the only state that we are going to save like in our application. And of course, we have some actions for modifying that state. So some reducers here. Create a new cocktail list, add a cocktail to a list, and delete cocktail, which it basically updates our state. And you can pass like the parameters, the list ID, the new cocktail. Basically, these are actions for Redux to keep updated our state. But we are not going to work with this neither. And of course, we have like divided as well as our components here. We have our pages folder here. which is basically where we contain the biggest pages or containers, as we saw in our presenter. These are the presenter, basically the containers of, for example, my home page, my cocktails page, and my cocktails page. That are the biggest pages components here. And another thing, it's usually good. It's not a must, but as I told you, React is very free, and you can have like many other like ways of implementing it. But it helps for naming it a component. For example, if it's a general page, you can name it ending with page. For example, cocktail search page, home page, my cocktail page. And if it's a component, you can name it like cocktail list component, cocktail ending with component. And the third option is cocktail list details modal for modals. It's the only three kinds that I have here, but of course it helps when you are like searching for components or for things. It helps for you to have your project like cleaner. And I think that's all. Last I'm going to explain how is a component composed. Basically, as I told you, you can have like everything write it in a single file, but we are going to separate a little bit because it helps, like, as you remember, I show you here. It's important to separate the UI logic from the presentation. So it helps us a lot of understanding how our components works and that. So in the basics, a component should have like inside the cocktails page or every name of the components an index.tsx file, which in its very basics is like this, basically. As you know, we're going to use React using hooks, which it means like basically everything in React is a function. So we are returning just functions here. This is, for example, a component. And this is the view part, which is JSX syntax here, for example, as you see here. And basically every component is distributed like this. We have an index.tsx file, which has the view, the JSX, a component TS file, which has like some functions related to that component and constants and that, and styles if needed. Not necessarily, but if a component need to have a style, you can have this page, of course. So, okay, let's stop of talking about the project structure and let's start with our application. I divided here the application in a lot of tips, for example, for us to be easier to refactor it and to remember. Now the application, of course, works, but we can like improve it and make it better for us to know how to make things better. Okay, and starting for the one with the tip number 1, keep components under 100 lines. It's not a must. Of course, nothing happens if you leave components like bigger than 100 lines, but usually if your component is bigger than 100 lines, it's almost for sure that you can like split it better in another way. So the first thing we're going to do is in our create list modal here, as you saw here. This works, and of course, you can see here is perfectly fine that we have here our JSX code, but we also have here some logic regarding to the component, like methods and that. And for example, this component is small, but what happens if we have a project with a lot of methods? Of course, this list will grow like a lot, you know. So this file can get like very big. So the first thing to know in the way that we are using our project is we are going to split those like logic from the presentation. So first here, as we saw here, we have our clay list model that is a component, and we need to create another file. For example, I have another file here, and we are going to use hooks, which are basically used everywhere in our React app, which in its core they are functions. So I will say export count use. Another important thing, a hook also always needs to start with the keyword use. It's as a convention, and I will set the same name of the component, that is create list modal. That's important for us to give like consistency and know what we need to do with every part of the component and where it is. So as I told you, basically this is a function. We're going to return a function. And we can like pass this logic here. As you see, this is a method, for example, for creating a cocktail list. And this is Formic is a library, very popular library in React that helps us to manage forms, but this is like code, so it's using space here, and this will be like very crowded and difficult to understand. So we can encapsulate this, for example, this in our hook that we just created. That you see is like just the same part of the component. We of course need to import all the things that are missed, and we have now our methods here. So how can we use it? Of course, here the way of using a hook, of course, is putting it here. So it will be the same name, use grade list model. I need to import it, of course. And with this, I don't need this anymore. And as you see here, we have nothing here to extract from the hook, but because we are not returning anything from the hook, hooks are basically these functions that we need to return either variables or methods and that. And the thing that I was using here before, as you see, is my new cocktails form. So I need to return from the hook my new cocktails form here. I need to also import this. And with this, now I will be able to use this method here. I don't know if you are familiarized with this syntax, but this is object destructuring. It's a thing of JavaScript, but it's very easy. I mean, for accessing, we are going to talk a lot of this during the training, so don't worry. We're going to see more examples from here, but basically I am destructuring from this object, this method, and now I can use it here in the JSX syntax as before. So, but if you see here, we are still missing something. We are missing this method that we're passing like from the props. As I told you, React components are basically functions. So these are basically function parameters, by saying in a way, that are passed to them. So we were like accessing the parameters before, and we don't have it here anymore. So we need to somehow like pass the parameters to this hook here. And to start with this, I will go with tip number 2. That is, since we are using TypeScript, it's important to create a custom interface to define the properties that a component will receive. I mean, like in a method, defining which information our component needs to have as an input. For example, in this case is this, but we are defining this here, which looks kind of ugly. So I'm going to remove it from here. And in this other file that is intended for that, is intended for interfaces, for constants, as you see here, and for custom logic regarding to that specific component only. I can create an interface as in TypeScript, and I will name it how I will name it. As it's good to name interfaces starting with an I, and I will use the same name of the component for us to be easy to look for it, and finish with the keyword props. So now I will know with this that this interface is defining the properties of this component that I am creating it. So now instead of having all the object defined here, I can just use it here, and it's the same as that. And this component will know that I am receiving these properties, and also this model is using the properties. So I need to define here that this model is using the properties. And again, I am going to destructure the methods because, for example, I will show the difference, because if I am putting here props, it's totally fine. I am saying that this hook or function will receive a parameter that is called these properties, and is of type of this interface, and I can access the properties like this props dot create list. But this could be like, I mean, it could be like result in bigger code, and something is difficult to handle. So perhaps we can we sometimes can use object destructuring. So if I am only using onCreateList, this is the same of using props dot onCreateList. So I am just extracting the value of the properties and using it here. So it's perfectly fine. But now the hook is asking me, okay, I need to have the props here. So of course we need to pass the props, which are the same that we defined here, to the hook. And now accessing, as I told you, it's not that one way is better than another. Of course, we don't need to abuse from object destructuring neither, but just to know that we can have like both ways of destructuring properties, or just accessing like props dot and the name of the property. Okay, so now we have this component. Sorry, do you have?
Yeah, I mean, I've got a question because sorry, I got a little bit lost. So where was the hide modal function coming from?
The hide modal here.
Yeah, so we were in the create list modal, right? And
yeah,
there was no hide
no,
function. So you just created it from scratch?
No, it's coming for the properties. As I told you, this is a function basically. And I am telling this that this function, or in this case, a component, will receive some properties. In this case, it's going to receive on create list.
So it will come from the parent component.
Of course, it comes from the parent component. If you see here, for example, where we.
So it was already defined in the create list model
component. Yeah, in whoever component that is the parent passes the function here.
Cool.
So it basically works like this.
Okay, I got it. Thanks.
Okay. And continuing with this.
I mean, is everybody following? I mean, any other question?
I hear you very low.
Yeah. How would you define a hook exactly? I mean, it's a function, or is just to make code smoother, or?
A hook is basically a function, you know, like it's intended for encapsulated logic. You can have here like methods. You can have here basically anything. But yeah, you define it like this. You just it's a constant. We are using like arrow function like syntax here, and you just define what you want to enter to pass as a parameter to that hook, and you need to return something. For example,
so it's basically to encapsulate code like functions. But there's a difference between function and hooks, more like, or
basically a hook is a function. It's just like a convention for us. It can work. For example, if I put any other name but I mean, like for the purposes of React, for you to know that it's a hook, you just like define it using the use keyword. So that's how they are defined. So it's kind of this. We're going to see more hooks in the following parts, but it's just like for us to watch.
You know, I was not seeing the difference between function and hook. It was just
yeah, but because they are basically, as I told you, they're basically functions. So so yeah, it's just for example, a way of calling of knowing that it's a different function intended for some purpose. It's like if we have a group of functions that do something that are hooks, you know. It's not that they have any special behavior or that, but just for specific purposes. But don't worry, we are going to see more examples after.
Okay. Yeah, because inside a hook you can have a function.
Like yeah, of course. You can have here functions and variables and everything you want. Okay. And okay, continuing with the tip number 3. For example, is that keep components dummy. You remember here that we saw that I told you that presentation components need to be like basically dummy, just like present information and send user events. So here, it doesn't make sense for us to have like, I have a function, a method here that basically is like, as you saw before, the API has strange, like organize their properties and the ingredients, and this function is basically what it does is concatenating all the properties into one single string for displaying the ingredients. So that logic is okay, but it's like it doesn't look very good here inside a component, you know, because if it's big logic and it's a thing that we can probably reuse in a lot of components. So following with this, we should like keep our components dummy, just a component like for rendering information and for sending data. So from here, I'm going to this function, remove it, basically. And of course, I need it here. I still need it here. But I am going to create another hook here. As I told you, I have, for example, cocktails hook defined just for it. And I can copy the same function to a custom hook here that is just cocktail with the same logic. But what is this good for? Because it encapsulates the logic, extracted from the view part, and also it helps me to make it like reusable. I can use it in more than one component. I don't need to have it there. So what I need to do is just use now this hook in this part of the application, like this. And as you see, this hook is telling me that it is returning this method. That is the same method I have before, but now it's encapsulated, and I just access this method this way. So we like get rid of all the code here, and of course this is like more structured, and we can reuse this hook in as many components as we want, not just here. So continuing with tip number 4. The next one is to separate the model and the presentation layer. This is another important key because, as I told you here, in the model should be like the logic related to the data fetching, for example, the store and all of that. So here we have we need to basically separate this. And how can we do that? Of course, our first part is to let me search what it is here. We have, it's a good practice for us, like as you see here, we have like custom hooks just for accessing the store, I mean the global store, and for accessing our API. So for example, for any of you who have worked with Redux, you know that you can like dispatch actions, which are basically you are telling the store that you want to change it or perform any action that we saw before, like created a list or deleted a list. It's just actions like for mutating the state. And we can also like select parts of the state that are reactive, you know, that will stay like constantly updated in our applications. This, of course, we can dispatch actions directly from any component. For example, I can, if I will use it here, I can dispatch it from here, and it will work. But that makes it difficult for us. Like if something in the state change, we need to change it in our components and that's why we, as we saw here, it's important to have our model like clearly separated for that. And this is basically what this hook does. It's just a hook for mutating our model. So for example, I want here to have a function that is for creating a cocktail list. So I will create a function, create cocktail list, for example, and I need my title, which will be a type of string, and I will pass a description, which also will be a string. This will return void. And with this, I have defined my function. And in this function, I want to alter the general global state. You know, so it's like I am going to use Redux. As I told you, this if we are using like context API or Flux or anything like that, we are going to make this here, and we are going to import here our action creators that we have like defined here. As I told you, this, do you remember at the first we saw it? These are like methods basically for mutating the state. So we are basically here with this is already defined. We pass this title and description, and it's creating our state a new list, you know, with an empty array and that. And we're basically telling this here that we want to dispatch to our state a new list. So I'm going to pass the parameters that it receives. And with this, I am dispatching the action directly to my state. And I will make a console log here. I will copy this for it to be like faster. And now a new list. State. And with these two lines, this line of code, the only thing that it's doing is like saving directly to my state. And as I told you, I can perfectly use it in any component, but it's good to have it like here, like isolated and apart in just a specific hooks, like dedicated just for mutating the store. So now what I can do here is, of course, returning this function so I can use it in any other component and be able to use it wherever I want. I think I am using this here. Yep. So I will use my hook that I just created. Use cocktail list store, which is basically this hook that has all the related logic like isolated here just for mutating the state. And in this, that is my cocktails page component, I will just use my create cocktails list that has all the logic inside for creating a list in my store. And I will use it just here. Create cocktails list like this. It needs to receive some parameters that I already have it here. As I told you, the structuring is very useful for us. Like we can get like the title here and the description. I can just pass it to the title and the list description. So as I told you here, another good practice, as we saw here, is in our components directly, because it's our component accessing the state through another hooks to keep like the state logic encapsulated. So in this way, I am this method, what it's doing is like saving to my store, but I'm not using here like directly in my component. So in this way, we keep like each concern related to every part like isolated. So basically, it's easier for us to work with this and keeps our code cleaner. And it happens the same with the other part. As I told you, we have the store in one hand, and in the other hand we have like the data fetching and that logic. We are using here in our project ReactQuery, which, as I told you, is basically a library for React. You see, they are using hooks because it's a global reference for us. So we are using ReactQuery for fetching data and performing API requests here. And this, what it does, it connects directly with the Axios function and returns our data and the state for our query. And of course, we can use this directly in our component like this, use query and that, and get the data we want in our components, because this is, as you see here, this is directly a component. But what happens with this? It can make like you can have your component like very crowded. For example, if you add like extra logic here as filters and that to your request, it will be like difficult to handle if the application grows. So it's always good to have like custom hooks as the same as from the state, but from the API part to access the model layer directly. So for example, I have here this encapsulated logic, and I just will access here to it as easy as using the hook, like we have done before in a lot of places. So I just import this, and since this have all this logic like in the inside, we now can have our cocktails here, which is our list of cocktails that is returning from the API, and to know the state if it's loading, so to display a spinner or something like that. and we have all the logic encapsulated here. And since you can see here, this hook and especially ReactQuery is very important because you can have filters for that. For example, we have some filter here to perform an API request to my cocktails by cocktail type, alcoholic and non-alcoholic. I don't know if you remember that part of the application demo. So here I have connected to as I told you, I have encapsulated here in my state a method and a state and a local state of a component for me to know which option in the dropdown I select, and I will pass this option in the dropdown to this hook that I just created for it. So it can loads the query depending, it can execute the request depending on the part on the filter that I am selecting. You have questions until here or something like you want to comment before continuing? No? Okay,
no,
good.
Not yet.
Yeah, by the way, if you feel that I am going very fast, just let me know what they are because there are some tips in a very short time. So I am trying to compact all of them very quickly. But of course, all of this will be, I will give to you written, and you of course will have the video after of this for you to be easier to watch every tip at your pace and understand the project better. The fifth tip is it's very important and it's easier for us to place the state close to where it's needed. What I mean with this, of course, this is good because I mean, accessing the state like an API request or accessing directly to the store, if you place it in a top component, for example, in a parent component, you should pass this state in props to the child component, and that's difficult. So a good practice is to, for example, if I am going to use a cocktail list in this component, no matter if this component is needed, I mean, is annotated in some parent component, I will use or read from the state directly the information I need in this specific component for it to be easier to handle it here and not to pass through a lot of components. So for the fifth, what I need to do is, do you remember that we have our global hook for the store? I am going to access it because it's use cocktails list store, for example. And as you remember here, this I'm going to close because I have a lot of tabs open now and it's complicated to see. As you see here, this is our hook that we saw before that is only intended, its only purpose is to access the state, to mutate the state and to read from the state. I am reading the cocktail list from the state and I am returning this in the hook. So now by using this directly in the hook, I will use my cocktail list. I don't need this anymore. So this can be, so following the fifth tip, it's good to use the state closer to where it's going to be needed. For example, I need to here to render a list of the cocktails and I'm going to use it here. So it's best to read it from here rather than from a parent and to pass it as a props, because it will keep our application our user experience will be easier. So and it will keep our application state cleaner. And continuing with the tip number 6, as I told you, object structuring is very easy. Of course, we don't need to, it's not a must, and it's not intended for us to abuse or to use it a lot, but it's very useful here. I talk a lot of object structuring, so I'm going to get dive a lot on this, but as you see here, we are accessing the properties or that we pass to this function, that is component function. So we have a method and a property, but it's easier for us if we just structure it by accessing this way, and it keeps our component cleaner. Of course, you need to be careful because if sometimes the component that gets a lot big, I mean, they can grow, and you will have like problems with the naming, and you need to be sure that you don't like rename this. So in small components it works good, but from larger components perhaps you want to keep the props to know which are properties coming from the outside and which are properties are defined from the inside. So okay, continuing with number 7, hook return types. This is very important, and this is tricky kind of in a way, but as I am telling you, hooks like have a lot of ways of be defined. You can basically do a lot of things in there, and as you see from now, well, I am only returning like objects, for example, so I can use it like this for my object. But you can make like hooks more generic, I mean common patterns, and you will see in a lot of React libraries that are third-party and that in your projects. You can find returned hooks with curly braces, like objects, or you can find hooks returned in arrays. And what an array gives us like as an advantage? Well, it gives us the advantage that we can have this functionality, as you see here, but we can name the things that we are returning as we want. So this makes the hooks like more generic. For example, I can name it my method, and as you saw, it's the same. It receives a cocktail and it's returning a string. So it's the same. It's receiving a cocktail and it's returning a string. But it not in this way. It not forces us to have the same naming. So this is basically a tip for us to make like hook returns names like generic, and for us to be like easier to I can use it like this, and to be like easier for us to understand and to name inside our components. Of course.
Question: in that case, you are relying on the order of the returned arguments, right? Okay.
Yeah, that's right. But it's as I told you, you gain the way of making more generic. For example, a React built-in hook that has it is the use state, which is a very popular hook. I mean, everybody that has used React knows how it works, but it basically returns an array of 2 elements. That you know that the first element will be our state, and the second element will be a function that will set this state. So this allow us to have like generic naming, for example here, because I can say, for example, my toggle button is loading or set is loading. So we gain that, and of course we can like mix some both in order to return like predefined name things and generic name things. So we need to return this way. I don't know if you have any question from this part here.
No.
Okay. I hear you very low again.
Sorry. What do you mean with hooks return types? I mean, types, in this case, it will return in a function, but for you, a type is the...
Well, yeah, I don't mean types. I mean the naming rather than types, you know, because at the end of the day, this is like, of course, is a function that we already defined here, which receives this and returns a string. So the only thing that we can change by using curly braces or by using like brackets like for an array is the name that we change, the name of the function. So it could be like more generic and need not to be like more specific. For example, if I have a hook for presenting a model or something like that, I don't need to return a function that is named present model. I can make it generic and I can use it then here to be like present calculator model or present image model. So it basically does the same in the inside, but it helps us to be like to make the code more readable from the outside.
Yeah, I was just not understanding why you say the hooks, like the name of the type was not.
Yeah.
I understood wrong. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, and continuing with number 8. This is another important thing to understand. use effect is a built-in React hook. It's also like there for us to use it. And basically, well, as you know, here in React, at least with the functional approach, we don't have like a component lifecycle as like on init or on destroy on that. But the way to handle this is by using effect, with basically what does this hook does? It's like it runs a function, or anything that we say here, it runs a function that well runs every time the dependency array changes. How this is translated to more like human words, of course. We are going to say, for example, this variable contains the state of our toggle. I don't know if you remember that we have here that this toggle, the alcoholic and non-alcoholic. This variable, what it does, it contains if what is selected. So for example, if I add it here as a dependency, I will select a log with this. This log is going to execute every time this variable changes, you know? So for example, I will show you the console here. So for example, if I change to non-alcoholic, you see, I will put a more descriptive text here. Okay, so if you see here, when I change this variable, the function inside the hook executes again. So if I change it again, it re-executes. So you get the concept. The use effect hook will execute every time this variable change. But what happens, for example, if I want to display the initial value of this variable just one time, you know? It's like, what can happen is like on the first render of the component, I want to display the initial value or get the initial value, for example, of this variable. What can I do? Well, there's a way of use effect to execute just once at the beginning of a component, kind of like on init or on create. That is like creating the hook, but with an empty dependencies array. And this will like only execute once at the first time and displaying this value. But what we have, like we have a problem here, because if, as you say, see, if we save here, the same console is telling us, okay, you have a missing dependency here because you are telling me that I need to render this variable, but this variable can change and I don't have it here in my dependency array. So what I need to do? Okay, it says that the dependency is missing. Of course, that's okay. That's good because this variable is dynamic. You know, it's like it can change on that. So at the first time is going to render, but it can change after that. So another important concept from here with React is the use effect hook. So for example, the same variable, I am going to say it here. And another built-in hook is the use ref, which basically it stands for a reference. So what I'm doing here is for this variable, I am creating a reference for the first value ever on the component. So I will just store the first value that it has and store it here in my reference. No matter if it changes after that, it's like I am getting the first value of that. So if I use it here, you need to access the current property to get the value. Now the warning disappears and I can get the first value of this. So if you see here, well, we wrote it for you to see. I can see, okay, changes alcoholic, which is the initial value of that variable. And if I change it, it won't change anymore. This is a different log, you know, like select the category. But if you see the changes, which was the log that we create, doesn't change anymore. It just like renders on the first appearance of the component on the first appearance. So that's a way of implementing, you know, kind of for actions that we need to handle at the beginning of the creation of a component in the hooks form of React. So any question of this you have? Nope. Okay. So continuing with number 9. This is very, very fast. Well, for a specific React query, it's more likely if you use React, it's very likely for you to work with React query. Of course, there are a lot of approaches, but I think it's the most popular nowadays. It's a library, as I told you, for fetching data from APIs. And basically what we are doing here, the first arguments is a query key, which what this helps us with. Okay, this helps us with like creating an internal query key that has a unique like property now. And this is very useful because, for example, I don't know if you have noticed, but the first time it loads, and after that, it's just like, it seems that it's loading like instantly. It's because of ReactQuery caches the information and it's refreshing it in background. But that is possible because of the keys. I will leave you some information for you if you want to leave it more, but it's very important for us to understand how query keys like work. And also we can mix it with filters because, for example, you see this is a filter and this will cache and save the information of every component. By the way, this React query hook in the inside, it uses a use effect. So it knows, for example, if my key or if my filters changes, it will re-execute the API query, as we saw with use effect. It re-executes depending on the dependencies, and get me the new data that we have here. Is basically how it works. But yeah, it's just an important thing to mention.
Okay, quick question. So how does ReactQuery know when to go to the server to update the cache data?
You have like a pre-configured, I think, time. I'm not sure how many time it is that it refreshes every time, but also you can like configure the hook here. I think the property is, let me see.
Yeah, it's okay. So it's based on time, right? So there's a kind of timeout in which you need to refresh the cache.
It's a kind of timeout. I don't remember the name of the property, but I can say it you now. Or you can like say, okay, I want for you to not get it from the cache and like get it manually for every time. You can like select basically.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, and it manages all of this for you. So, okay, we're almost finished. We are with the last tips. One of the last, of course, there's a lot of ways for us to style our React components. We can style even using JavaScript, even using like CSS, but our way, well, I think it depends on what people likes, but I like to use like Sass. So I think it's easier for us to make it easier to make styles, but we have a problem with that. We cannot like encapsulate components, so I mean styles. So it's important for us to grab all the styling things. I will close all of these in a parent node, and I am going to show you why. Because, for example, you see here we have our cocktail list component, and as you see here, we have in the parent node. This is another thing that I will explain to you later. A modal is not part of the component because it's a thing that it renders like it doesn't matter for the intended thing of this component. And I explain you later why. Okay, so for example, as you see here, my parent node is the cocktail list component. So now inside my cocktail list component that I have a class and I am encapsulating all my styles here. And it's good to have just one like parent class for us to encapsulate, because what happens if I put it outside? Let's see. If I put it outside, since the styles are not encapsulated, I am going to add something here for us to be like for us to be clearer. As you see here, this is the component. So basically it's adding like a red thing, which is okay because I want for this component to be added this style. But what happens, if I go to another component and by accident, I don't know, I use the same class name in a component, for example. So if I save it, I mean add button, and imagine that I put add button component regarding to this specific component, and as you see here, I don't have, because this is a style sheet from another different component, that is the cocktail list component, and this is the cocktail list page. So apparently they don't have any relationship. I don't even have the style sheet imported here. But what happens if I go here? You see a weird like text appears in red, and you can get confused of why I am like having this style. I'm not using it here. And this is basically because we are like the styles are applying like globally. So a good thing of managing this is to keep like the styles encapsulated, of course, inside a single parent node. And in this way, no matter if I have it here, it won't affect other components, and it will just affect the component that I would like to. So that's important why we should do this. And okay, continuing with this, perhaps for some of you who have worked with React before, you have found that React is very common for us to get this warning that you see. JSX expressions must have one parent element, and it's because React JSX, of course, just accept one parent element. But for example, in this and design, I didn't mention that before, but I am using for the visual part and that and design, which is a very cool UI library for us. And for example, it has a way to present models in this way. So you basically get it here. It's the same as Ionic. Ionic, if for those of you who have worked with Ionic React, you can also present models represented with an element here. But this is not basically part of the component, and because of course you see here it has its own component, but it's open from here. So I don't want to nest it here in my main container, you know. So for that reason and many others, if I want to return a single element, I will use React fragments, which is basically this, an empty tag. And this is good because it won't render anything in your DOM, but it will keep the consistency and the requirement of just having one single parent node. And the last tip, which was the 12. Wait, I think I didn't say this. Is finally a minor thing, the import order, you know. It's a good practice, of course. It's not a must to keep like our imports to keep them in order. For example, I mean, it should be like first our built-in and external, like for example, and design, React, and from external libraries. By the way, I have here it's because I have mixed codes. And after that, our internal components. It's just a way to keep it like cleaner. You know, it's not a thing from React, but it's a thing in general. So, but it helps of us to have our components cleaner and more understandable. And to finish, of course, just to remember you, JSX and having the ability of writing JavaScript code here, it doesn't mean we should, because for example, as you see here, it's like pure React. You pure with JSX, and of course you can write JavaScript even here in the view. So, but this doesn't mean that it's good. So, as you see here, I can do this, but as you see this, like it's being shown many times because it has been executing like every time I re-render the component, and that's very bad for us. So we just like need to write here a very basic JavaScript, you know, like for conditional rendering, like ternary expressions and maps, for example, for looping and displaying a lot of elements, but not any other logic. And that's basically it for us. I'm sorry if I go like very fast, but we have like a short time. I hope you get a general idea of what you can do to improve our ways, and we are like building and creating React projects, and this will help you like understand and manage better your code. Of course, here I will give you the presentation after that, but you have here some useful links. For example, some best practices. That's nice. Very nice for you to, because Redux can be used in a lot of ways, but the newest one and the recommended official version is using Redux Toolkit, which makes the life easier for us. And this is a very nice video that explains it very short for this. I recommend you to watch it. Of course, we have another articles that tips for using ReactQuery and how to understand it better, handle state, best practices, some more information about the model view presenter pattern that I showed you before. some formic docs, the way that I told you of managing like forms in React. I didn't get deeper in that because it's a very extensive topic. Of course, you have here the Cocktail DB link, the database that we use in this tutorial here. And that's a bonus, but when I was searching for the Cocktails DB, I found a GitHub page that has like a lot of public APIs. I found the Cocktail DB here, but it has like, you know, very separated and public API. So it's good for you if you want to test something in your personal projects sometime. And before like finishing, well, by the way, you see here our application is working as before, but now like implemented in a clearer way. For example, we can create a list. I will create a tequila cocktails, for example, just cocktails with tequila. For example, I don't know. And this I will, of course, I didn't implement a search bar here because it's like very basic application, but we can always use command found. And I see here I have a cocktail with tequila, and I can add it to the list just as before. So our application is like working perfectly fine, but now our code developer experience has been improved. Mm-hmm. So I don't know if you have any questions or you want to add something. Nope.
No questions. Okay.
Okay. So that was all, and I hope you, as I told you before, you understand well the basic idea, and you will apply these practices in our and React projects and your personal React projects that you have. And thank you very much.
Thank you very much.